Well, we're going to look at the 73rd Psalm today. We're going to be taking a look at a guy named Asaph. Now, I could say it this way, as I say on so many weeks, because I want to honor him. Zig Ziglar was my mentor. And Zig used to talk about having a checkup from the neck up, meaning that sometimes we have to have attitude adjustments that we go through in life. And that's also true when it comes to our own spiritual lives. And so today we're going to be taking a look at this remarkable psalm, and it's written by a man that is a Levite. Now, the Levites were the ones that would work in the temple. The Levites were the ones that, helped to represent God. And there were many of those Levites that were music leaders, just like Matt Van Zant is for us today. There were music leaders in those days. And so in temple worship, they also referred to these Levite musical leaders as being prophets. And the one that we're going to look at today has the name Asaph. And Asaph actually means the gatherer of people. And so he had the ability to be able to gather people together. We're told that he wrote 11 different psalms that sometimes are referred to as laments. And so he was a part of a family of people that were worship leaders. Just think of them as the forerunners of your Southern gospel groups. You know, when you used to have families like the Lefevres and others that, did music. And so there was a guild of these people, and they were referred to also as the sons of Asaph. And so as guild temple musicians, they were the ones who would help to gather the people together, and then through worship, they would help them to be able to, as we learned last week, to be able to bow down before God and to be able to realize that one of the primary benefits of being able to worship is it becomes the change agent in helping to be able to mature us as believers. Because as we focus on God, then the worship can begin to change us. We begin to experience God. And so this 73rd Psalm is a remarkable look through the eyes of the psalmist at the transformational power that worship produces. Now, the psalmist also gives us a very clear picture of the work that worship does when we devote ourselves to it. So last week was why we worship, and we discovered that the word worship in the biggest sense means that we bow down, we humble ourselves before God, we realize how awesome God is. Now, next week, I'm really looking forward to the service. It's going to be our Palm Sunday service, and we're going to be observing the two ordinances that Jesus gave to us. He gave to us the ordinance of the Lord's Supper, which we're going to participate in next week, and he gave us the ordinance of baptism, and we're going to be doing that next week. Would really love, I think we've got about 14 people right now that are going to be a part of baptism next week. If you need to follow the Lord in believers' baptism, come and join us. I'm going to be doing some of the baptisms. I think Isaac has got some of the students he's going to be baptizing. And if you haven't seen Isaac baptize, you're in for a treat. And when Isaac baptizes, it looks like he's casting out demons and baptizing at the same time. That young man's got some energy. So we're going to be doing that. And we're going to be focusing next week on just some verses about the wonder of worship. When we think about who God is and about how we worship him. So the first week was why we worship, and today we focus on the work of worship and the transformational power of the way that it works in our life when we devote ourselves to what is really and truly worship. And Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6 gives us the real key, because it says that without faith, it's impossible to be able to please God, him. Without faith, it's going to be impossible for us to be able to please him. And you say, why would that be true? Because we have to come to God and believe that he is, so that he can then be a rewarder to those of us who seek after him. There are benefits to worshiping God. And so the psalmist is going to begin his instruction by reminding us that the blessings of God are tied to people who are pure in heart. And the more we worship, the holier we become. And the holier we become, listen to me here, the happier we're going to be. Because holiness and happiness are intricately, tied together. Hard for me to say this morning, but you know what I was saying. So here's a guy who is the worship leader. Here's a guy who's written 11 of the Psalms that you and I are still reading thousands of years later. And you know what he said? He said, I know that God is going to bless those who have a pure heart, but he says, as for me, I was in a lot of trouble. As a matter of fact, he's going to tell us, my feet came really close to stumbling and my steps had almost slipped. I had almost fallen into that trap. I was almost backsliding, would have been the word that we would have used in church years ago. When you talk about someone backsliding, it meant that they were regressing in their relationship with the Lord. It didn't mean that they lost their salvation. It just simply meant that their salvation was not having as much meaning to them. And ironically, it's one of the laws of the universe that it applies to. And that's called the law of entropy. Because the law of entropy says if something is not getting progressively better, then it's going to get worse. In other words, in your spiritual life, you can't just get to a point where you go, okay, I'm good. I'm not going to study my Bible anymore. I'm not going to really be a person of prayer. I'm not going to really go to church. I'm not going to really be around God's people, even though the Bible says, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together as is the manner, the habit of some, that we're supposed to come together and we're supposed to be together. But you know what? People can begin to slide away from that. And so preachers of another generation would say those people have backslidden. They backslidden in their Bible reading. They backslidden in their prayer life. They backslidden, in church attendance and fellowship. And all of those things that I've just talked about, we call spiritual disciplines. And the spiritual disciplines are things that we do to keep us fresh with God, to keep us tied together, so that every day that we experience His sanctification in our life, we can grow closer to God. We can know God more. In other words, we can truly experience God. And so there is a work in worship. And so the psalmist is telling us, man, I was beginning to falter. I was beginning to get myself in a really bad place. Let me read it to you, and then we're going to dissect the rest of the 73rd Psalm. He says, surely God is good to Israel and to those who are pure in heart. You want God to really be good to you? Then be a person that is pure in heart. Holiness and happiness, they go together. But as for me, the worship leader, my feet came close to stumbling and my steps had almost slipped. Why in the world was he going through this? Well, he tells us, for I was envious of the arrogant, and I saw the prosperity of the wicked. I know that none of us ever deal with these things. And then he begins to give his perspective on the way that things look from the outside. The irony is, he's describing these people perfectly. He's describing these people as arrogant. He's describing sinful people, but I want you to watch what happens. He becomes envious of the sinful. He becomes envious of their lifestyle. He said they have prosperity. Now remember, this is from his perspective right now. He's getting very, very disillusioned. There's no pain in their death, and their body is fat, meaning they're getting everything that they want in life. They're not in trouble as other men. They're not plagued like mankind. Therefore, when he's looking at them, He says they're full of pride. He says pride is their necklace. The garment of violence covers them. Their eyes bulge from fatness. The imaginations of their heart run riot. When he says their eyes bulge from fatness, he's talking about literally that they live such an opulent lifestyle when it came to eating. When I used to weigh a lot more and I'd about given up on ever losing weight, I used to say that I wanted to eat till my eyes swell shut. So this is what he's talking about when he says, that their eyes have bulged from fatness. The imaginations of their heart run riot. In other words, they're thinking about anything but God. They mock and they wickedly speak of oppression. They speak from on high. They have set their mouths against the heaven, and their tongues parade throughout the earth. And then they say, dropping down to verse 11, how does God know? And is there any knowledge with the Most High? Behold, these are the wicked, and they're always at ease, and they always increased in wealth. And here's the impact on his life. Surely in vain. When something is in vain, it means with no merit. Vanity, it's meaningless. He's saying this life that I've lived as a godly man, as a worship leader, to me, it's in vain. But I have kept my heart pure, and I've washed my hands in innocence. For I've been stricken all day long, and I've been chastised every morning. Let me tell you what he's saying. He's saying from the time I get up in the morning, I'm focused on what these other people have, and it does not seem fair. And just imagine, he didn't have social media to deal with, but we do. Because we get to watch all of these things paraded in front of us all the time. And so what he did was he had envy, and he was jealous of everything that was going on in the lives of ungodly people. So he ceased being concerned about reaching the sinful, and he started focusing on the success that he saw that sinful people had. And listen, we're up against it every day. We look at our sports heroes. We look at the people that are in music. You look at somebody, in the soccer world like Messi, who signed a contract for $673 million. Or Patrick Mahomes at $503 million. Not count all the endorsements that are going on, because you can't watch television without Patrick, doing something for State Farm. Or Mike Tripp, $426 million. Or Shohei Ohtani, $700 million contract for 10 years. Or Kirk Cousins, good, fine Christian believer, hope he's going to tithe, $180 million contract that he just signed with the Atlanta Falcons. And I know that none of you ever get irritated or experience any envy at work when all of a sudden your biggest rival, someone that just lives an ungodly life, makes a fool out of themselves at every office party, ends up getting a 40% salary increase, and you don't get any, right? And not only that, but he's married to a supermodel who is going to be the world's next great neurosurgeon. Have you ever noticed how that goes? And they just bought a 26,000 square foot house over in Milton. It's featured in the Architectural Digest. They have the matching G-Wagon sitting right in front of the mansion, which is parked next to the stretch Hummer limo that they use to take their friends out to the private, airstrip, where they have a turbocharged Gulfstream G5 just waiting to whisk them and all of their obnoxious friends away to a beach house that they have up in the Hamptons, or maybe they're going to Nectar Island this weekend and they're going to hang out with Richard Branson. No, it doesn't bother us at all, does it? And to really tick us off, they're skinny as all get out, so we know they can afford Ozempic or Mounjaro. And it's really beginning to get on our nerves. And that's what the psalmist was saying. And he admitted it. How did he deal with this attitude problem? Because here's what envy does. Envy makes you feel deprived no matter how much you already have. Because envy makes you focus on what you don't have rather than realizing what you do have. So you know how the psalmist is going to deal with this? He's going to deal with it by worship. And you say, but wasn't he already a worship leader? Yes, he was. But he found himself sliding away, right? Get that song in your mind from Simon and Garfunkel for those of you that are older. He's sliding away, and he's trying to find out, how do I turn it around? So several points for you this morning. Point number one, the perverse perception of what is real in our world is indeed that. It's a perverted perception, because the world views things in a different way than God views things. And so when you view things the way the world views it, then you're going to be a person with envy. You're going to have something that's bigger. You're going to have something that's better, because envy is something that just absolutely colors the way that you look at life. And there is never enough to satisfy the eye. There's never enough that you can hear about the adoration for your narcissistic personality that's ever going to make you happy, and you're going to blame everybody else for your problems. So in verses 1 and 2, if you go back and you break it down, when we look at the world, listen, it's very easy to stumble. And the reason it's easy to stumble is because we're not focused on God. And when we look at the world, all we see is surface appearance. We don't see the underlying truth. So, because we look at the world and we're drawn into this false perception then of what really is success in life, it ends up getting us off base. So here's the way that we feel. Here's the way that you can tell if you've ever felt like Asaph. Have you ever looked at everything and cried out to God and said, it's not fair. Life is not fair. This is not right. Why does it have to be this way? Because he's looking at people that he admits they're arrogant. He says that they're wicked, but he says they're prosperous. And all of those things to go together in an interesting way, because obviously arrogant, nobody likes being around arrogant people. No one wants to be around wicked people except other wicked people. And when he says they have prosperity, it's interesting because in the Hebrew here, he's using the word shalom. And shalom is usually associated with peace, right? Shalom. When you talk about Jerusalem, it means the city of peace, the city of prosperity. And then he's filled with envy. And so the deal is, the world is a trap. And all that glitters is not gold. And we've seen from the start of it that the psalmist was saying, I'm falling into this trap because I'm envious of arrogant people. I'm seeing the prosperity of wicked people. And he's saying, I'm beginning to have problems with my perception of what life is really like. And right now, God, I do not think that you are being fair. And so it skews even what the truth is tremendously in his mind. He says, these people have no pain in their death. He's talking about the wicked. He's saying when you see their bodies, they're sleek, they're sound. They're the beautiful people. They're the ones that end up on magazine covers. And I just don't understand it, God. It does not seem to be fair. They're not experiencing the problems that I'm experiencing. You know, according to Barna Research, George Barna, a tremendous Christian researcher, he did a survey and he asked people, if you could ask God one question, what would it be? If you could just ask God one question, what would it be? You know what the number one question was? Why is there pain and suffering in the world? Why is there pain and suffering in the world? Why do bad things happen to good people? And why do bad things happen to godly people? I'm talking about people that are committed to God and love God. He goes on in verse 5, he says, they're not in trouble like other men. They're not plagued like we are. They don't have the financial problems. They're not struggling. They not only reject God, but they sin boldly. They put it in their music lyrics. They put it on the screen. They flaunt what they're doing in life. They reject God and sin boldly, but their careers are flourishing. They vacation wherever they want. They lead the good life. And the psalmist said, I don't understand it. I don't understand it. Listen, when I was doing some of my research for this, I looked up the guy Drake. Y'all know Drake, right? You know, the Canadian Drake. He has a Richard Miley watch that costs $5.5 million, a wristwatch. Oh, but don't you worry about him. He also has the Rafael Nadal, which is $1.5 million. He has another one that's $750,000. Another one is $435,000. That's probably for Mondays. Another watch is $620,000. Another one's $485,000. Now, listen to what the psalmist says about this lifestyle. Therefore, because, this is verse 6, their lives are turning out so well, pride is their necklace. They wear all of this with pride. They make sure that it's not something they're burying in their hearts. They make sure that they flaunt it. They make sure that they flaunt it in a way that people flaunt jewelry. Pride is their necklace. And he says violence. Interesting. Violence covers them like a garment. By the way, if you're looking for a gift for your spouse this next Christmas, you can buy what is called the incomparable necklace. It's 637 carats and it costs $55 million. Yeah, and you can pick that up, I'm sure, at a steal. And we're all sitting here that have children and grandchildren, and we're ticked off because a Happy Meal now costs $3.76. And it used to be $2.10. And we're going, why in the world are things the way that they are? Hey, that's what Asaph was doing. He's going, God, it's just not fair. And that's where he says their eyes swell out with fatness. In other words, they don't know hunger. They don't know what it's like to go without. He says their hearts overflow with follies. They scoff. They speak with malice. They threaten the opposition. And he says they even set their mouths against heaven itself. And they make fun of God. And they make fun of the people who are Christians and people who do embrace God. You know why they're so arrogant? They think that they have life figured out. They oppose God because life here on this planet is turning out the way that they want it. And Asaph is going, that's not fair. It shouldn't be like that. And because their life is turning out so well, other people then go, oh, I want to be like them. Even though it's an illusion. Even though we're seeing suicide soar among those people that are influencers. Because these influencers, who through the different filters that they use, you know, on their Instagram or on their TikTok, as long as that's around, I mean, all of these things they use to try to create a lifestyle that so many of them, it's just fake and it's fabricated. Do you know that there are airports that you can go to, private airports, where you can go on and have yourself photographed inside of a private jet to make it look like you're on a private jet? And there's even stages set up that if you don't want to go to the airport, there's sound stages you can go to and you can look like you're on that airplane. You can look like you're jetting to Acapulco or to wherever you're going, to Cabo, and you can do all of that. And so because it seems like when we watch social media, their life is turning out so well, we think it's great. And instead of them being the object of moral judgment, which by all rights they should be, instead they're praised, and then they tell you and I, as the common people, how we're supposed to live. I can have my private jet or two, but I can tell you to reduce your carbon footprint. Now, I can be Kylie Jenner, and I want to get on the other side of Los Angeles, but I don't want to deal with the traffic. So, literal story, truth, she jets from one side of LA to the other side. But we're worried about global warming. We're worried about climate change because that's a good thing to say. That's a good thing to mouth. But are you doing it? Are you doing the right thing? Or are you taking your concerts and funding abortion clinics everywhere? Is that who you want your daughter to grow up idolizing? Is that the concert you want to support? I mean, we have to ask ourselves those questions. These are hard questions. It's a difficult world. But if you get your eyes on the things of this world and you think that's all there is, then you're going to be in trouble. And let a church do something like a building program and try to raise money to build a children's building, or tries to raise money to build some ball fields for the kids in the community to be on, and watch the critics come out and say things like, well, I don't understand why they didn't use that money to do better things. You know, that attitude has always been around. I call it the Judas syndrome. You know, when the woman wanted to anoint Jesus, Mary wanted to anoint Jesus, she broke open this alabaster box that she had, and she took the perfume and she anointed his head and she anointed his feet and she wiped his feet with her hair as an act of adoration. And the people around Jesus were mortified. And they said, why would you allow her to do this? He said, what she just did will always be remembered. And here I am on March the 17th, 2024, still talking about it. But you know who got the most indignant? Judas. Because Judas was the treasurer. And Judas said, do you realize how much money we could have sold that perfume for? And we could have fed the hungry. You didn't give a rip about hungry people, Judas. You're going to betray him for 30 pieces of silver. Be real careful about the people that you hang around with that always have something negative to say if it's around a church doing something to make their community a better place. But these are the people that we're learning from. Oh, these are the people that are writing the books that people read, and people find no fault with them. And worse still, they openly mock God. And they say, how does God know? Is there knowledge with the Most High? In other words, I don't have to be accountable to God. Worship God? You think I'm going to bow down and worship God? You think I'm going to change my lifestyle and focus on other people? Asaph is fed up with trying to live a good life. And when the psalmist goes on, he said, you know, it's not bad enough that they're doing so well, but what makes it exponentially worse is I'm trying my best to be righteous and it's not paying off, and they're better off than I am. And I don't get it. I don't understand it. In verse 12, he says, these wicked people are always at ease. He says, they have increased in their wealth. It is ridiculous how much money they are worth. And he says about himself, surely in vain, I tried to keep my heart pure. He says, I look at my life next to him, and it's nothing. The sin of comparison, the sin of envy will eat you alive because it's never going to be enough. It's never, ever going to be enough. So you know what he said about his life? He said, I am stricken all day long, and I'm chastened every morning. This means he goes to bed at night thinking how bad he has it, and he gets up the first thing the next morning thinking the very same thing. Now, we don't know what the plague or punishment consists of, but this psalmist is looking at their life. He's looking at their defiance against God and the fact that God doesn't seem to do a blooming thing about it. And he looks on the other side of the scale and he goes, you know what? I'm going to the temple. You know, I'm studying the Torah. I'm doing all these things. You say, you know, I'm giving to my church, or maybe even really go the extra mile. I'm tithing to my church. I'm trying to do all the right things. And I want to know, where's the payoff? I mean, what good is it doing? I'm not getting a bigger house. I'm not getting a newer car. I'm not getting nicer clothes. You ever have thoughts like that? I have. He realizes this is going to kill him. He knows it's going to destroy his soul. So in verse 15, it's an interesting transition. He says, if I had said, I will speak thus, I would have betrayed the generation of your children. Let me tell you what he means right here. He said, I kept all of this inside of me, but it was eating him up. Now, finally, he's pouring his heart out to God. That's one of the smartest things that you can ever do. Hey, I'm all for going to a therapist. I'm all for seeking godly counsel. I'm all for those things. But nothing will ever substitute you just getting with God and pouring your heart out. Here's what he knew. His words out loud would devastate the people around him because he knew the importance of community here. So he's talking about his sense of loyalty to the believing community. That's the only thing that keeps him in the game. Do you know that's why coming to church is such a valuable thing? Do you know that's why being in a small group, being in a Sunday school class, having an accountability group, where you've got people around you, that when you go through a dark season in your life, there's people there to help you rally through this kind of a situation. And he said, if I walk on in this way, I would have been untrue to the circle of your children or this generation. He was saying, if I let it keep controlling me, my envy would make me disloyal to everything that I truly value. So in verse 16, he says, when I pondered to understand this, it was troublesome in my sight. You know why? Because at that moment, he was saying, I'm powerless. I'm powerless. This stuff doesn't make any sense. I'm hanging on to my spiritual integrity by a slender thread. And maybe some of you are too. You know, we all go through our seasons, don't we? I have good seasons, and I have struggle seasons. I don't mind telling you, as the CEO of Must Ministries, last year, our budget was $36.8 million. $36.8 million. A huge tranche of that was government funding to keep people from being on the streets, about $20 million. So I'm helping to run an organization that saw a $20 million adjustment in its budget, more than 50%. While we're still serving more people than we've ever served before. This year, we'll end up at about 75,000 unique individuals. Of those 75,000 unique individuals that we count only once, they use at least 3 of our services. That's a huge adjustment. That's personnel going from 140 people down to 110 people and asking people to do more with less. That's a lot mentally. On this side of my world, my dream is to see this building filled up with people. That's my dream. And I can sit back and go, oh, yeah, well, the world has changed and a lot less people are going to church now. All of these different, that still does not satisfy me. I spent the majority of my ministry trying to figure out where to put people because there were so many of them. And how do you turn that around? See, it's very easy here to get confused. And all of us get confused. But here's where it gets critical. Who do you talk to when you're confused? You should be talking to God. Because on one hand, if he gives in to his cynicism, he's going to betray everything that really has meaning and has given him identity in his faith community where he belongs and with his God. On the other side of it, life seems unfair, and I'm unhappy, and I'm at the brink of despair. And in that state of mind, I allow all the other emotions to begin to rule. I get confused, I get discouraged, I get bitter, I get envious, I get unhappy, I'm far from God, I get tossed about, I become, double-minded, backwards, forward, tempted, exhausted. Just give in and go ahead and do whatever I need to do to escape all of this. You cannot reason with this world and your troubling perception if this world is all you have, you'll be so discouraged. So the prescription for the proper perception is found when you worship. Verse 17 is the transition. He said all of this was going on until I came into the sanctuary of God. And then he says, I perceived their end. In other words, worship will adjust your perspective. And you go from a temporary perspective, just this world, to placing your mind on the things that are above this world. Now, your perspective is just simply the way you view life. When you encounter God, your perception will change because God will exchange your emotions for rational thinking. To know that God created you. To know that there is a creator of this universe. I mean, come on, look around. And to know that God knitted you together in your mother's womb. And so we have to realize that according to 1 John 2:17, that the world is passing away and also its lust. But the one who does the will of God will live forever. So now then, watch what happens with the psalmist. Verse 18, surely you've set them in slippery places. You've cast them down to destruction. He says, when I started worshiping, I realized how they're destroyed in a moment. I realize how they get utterly swept away by sudden terrors. He said, like when you're having a dream and when one awakes, oh Lord, when aroused. He said, you know what, God? I know that you despise what they're doing. The psalmist is saying there's more to reality than what we can see or what we can hear, and that God keeps a different score than the score that this world is keeping. We're all one heartbeat away from a slippery place. And that's why worship is so important. That's where the lights came back on for him. Even though he went through that season where he was struggling, because worship will guide you into truth in your heart of hearts. He said in verse 21, when my heart was embittered, I was pierced within. He said, and I was senseless and I was ignorant. I was like a beast. You know what he's saying there? He realized that his life was making no sense. That the bad choices he was making would be like an animal that doesn't have a moral sense like we have as humankind, and a sense of purpose. An animal's sense of purpose is just survival, just simply survival. But when you renew your relationship with God in praise and worship, it changes everything. In verse 23, he says, I'm continually with you. You've taken a hold of my right hand. In verse 24, worship provides for us not only God's presence, but it provides for us the will of God revealed for our individual lives. Verse 24, with your counsel you will guide me, and afterwards you're going to receive me to glory. That's last week's message in case you missed it. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. So worship, it grants us the power for daily living with a spirit of victory and not defeat. He said, verse 25, whom I have in heaven but you. And besides you, I desire nothing else on this earth. A phrase you've heard many times. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart, and He is my portion forever. The bottom line is, our behavior, what we do, flows from our perception and from our thoughts. And Proverbs 13:12 says, hope deferred makes your heart sick. Hope deferred makes your heart sick. Guys, y'all can come on out and get this. So let me tell you the deal. Heart sick in the Bible is your thinking. It's not about your heart. It's about your thinking. Hope deferred. You know, I thought I'd have a different career. You know, I thought I'd be in a different financial place. You know, baby boomers today are struggling so mightily. As our population continues to age, a lot of people didn't prepare for retirement. And so people are struggling financially. One of the fastest growing areas that we do food for at Must is senior adults. And we know it's only going to get larger in the days ahead. So hope deferred makes your heart sick. The remedy is you keep your eyes on God. I don't know how you do that without, number one, believing that He is and that He's a rewarder to those that seek Him, and by coming together in community to encourage one another. So now what we're going to do is we're going to sing some worship songs. If you want to accept Jesus, I'll be down here in the front. If you want to come down and say, hey, I want to be baptized, I'll be glad to talk to you. All you have to do is go out in the great hall, and there's people out there that'll meet you. We have some kits out there called Fresh Start. That's to help people who are new in their faith. And if you want to know more about baptism, there's a pamphlet inside of the Fresh Start kit. And all you got to do is go out there right after this service. There's no charge at all. And go out there. They got this little kit that they'll give to you. But I want us to just spend some time worshiping and in the music. And then we'll be done today. So would you stand to your feet right now? Matt, y'all ready? Father, bless the time that we worship in song. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.